So you wake up in the morning, let's say, and you feel, like, extra lethargic and don't really feel like doing anything despite knowing that you've got shit to do. So you stay in bed for, like, an extra hour. And then when you do finally get up, you turn on the television and you get to stare at a guy eat a hamburger on the camera. And it's weird, because, like, why does he get a hamburger when you don't get a hamburger? It's kind of unfair, don't you think? Kind of wish that you had a hamburger, too. So you go to the store. You go to the hamburger store, where they sell hamburgers on shelves. And there are 3 of them left on the shelf. So you put your basket up and take all 3 of them at once, much to the chagrin of the 2 people in line behind you. But you've got all 3 of them because you wanted them. So then all the way home in your car, you cannot think about anything else but stuffing your gullet full of these delicious, juicy hamburgers. So then you get home and you just sit down and eat all of them, all 3 of them, just one after another, and they're great, and you can't wait till you can get more of them into your body. And I mean, look at you just ate 3 hamburgers in a row. Like, that's pretty rad in terms of hamburger eating. So you kind of look at yourself in the mirror like, yeah, look at me, I ate all 3 of them. But then the mirror doesn't really smile back as much as you thought it would, and you don't really look as good as you thought that you had ought to, so you take the mirror and throw it out the window. Congratulations, you are all 7 deadly sins. And I'm gonna tell you about them. So the 7 deadly sins actually originated outside of Catholicism, with this sort of like hermetic order of Christian monks out in the desert. There was a gentleman called Evagrius Poticus, and he was the first to catalog like a series of 7, or possibly 8 depending on what you read, things that have to be overcome in order for you to be considered virtuous, which ended up being a slightly different list than the standard one that we have today. But the original ones were gluttony, fornication, avarice, pride, envy of another's good fortune, wrath, boasting, and dejection, or like sadness. So originally written in Greek, they changed it to Latin later and brought it to Europe, where the Catholics ate that shit up. And it became a steadfast and like strong part of Catholic litany. And it has since been used in just so many different pieces of media. So the final list that we know of as like the 7 deadly sins was put together in 590 AD by Pope Gregory I, who took like several of the different translations that they had already that had come to like embody the Catholic mythology version of like impurity and badness of soul, and simplified them a little bit. It consisted of sloth, gluttony, lust, envy, wrath, greed, and pride. Pride, being the last one on that list, is also considered to be the most deadly of all of the 7 deadly sins, because it is apparently the original sin that Satan committed, that Lucifer committed. In Catholic Christian mythology, it's really complicated, but anyway, that's where we got the 7 deadly sins that we now know of today. But let's leave the history of, like, where it came from to the side right now, and let's talk about some pop culture references. So early on we have Dante's Purgatorio, which is the, like, middle bit of his, like, 3-part epic poem where he had the Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. In Dante's Inferno, which everyone knows about because everyone knows about it and there was a video game about it and all this other stuff, there's the 9 circles of hell where each, like, different kind of sinner is put, and some of them are more bad than the others and that kind of stuff. But then he moves away from having 9 classifications of something to talking about the 7 classifications of something when he goes to Purgatory, and there's a mountain, and the higher up on the mountain you are, the less shitty of a sinner you are. So, like, the people who are at the very bottom are the ones that have pride, and then the higher up on the mountain you go, the closer you are towards heaven or something. And then Canterbury Tales also does it. So Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote Canterbury Tales, wrote The Parson's Tale, which technically, side note, isn't a tale. So the parson is, everyone else is like, oh yeah, you know, tell us a fable like the nun's priest did, and the parson is like, fuck fables, they are immoral, or some other bullshit, and plus I can't rhyme or do alliteration because I'm a talentless hack, so instead I'm gonna give you a litany about penitence. So he talks about how the 7 deadly sins can be, like, countered by the 7 heavenly virtues. But then moving, like, centuries forward, pretty much every instance of the 7 deadly sins being used, like, explicitly used in any piece of media came from those 2 pieces of literature. So here are a few notable examples. It's cold. So Full Metal Alchemist, the anime and the manga, uses the motif of the 7 deadly sins as the basis for the homunculi characters that were created by the magic of alchemy, essentially, and all of whom have to be defeated by the ones who have seen the truth and made sacrifices for it. In Soul Eater, there's the Book of Abon, which has, like, 7 chapters, and you go into the chapters, and each of them affects you in a specific way that, like, has to do with that sin. Like, the sin of sloth is this sort of warped reality where nothing moves because it's sloth. In Fairy Tail, there's a guild called Grimoire Heart, where their, like, 7-fighter elite team is based on the 7 deadly sins. In the comic books for the Teen Titans, there's an arc called Titans Together, where it ushers in the 6 sons of Trigon, who is coincidentally also the actually literally Satan dad of Raven, the best Teen Titan. So those 6 sons show up and they're like, hey Raven, let's be evil together and try to awaken her evil side, and each of them, including Raven, is one of the 7 deadly sins. In the 2005 movie adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the children and their parents that aren't Charlie and his grandfather are dominated by each of the 7 deadly sins. Apparently in the pilot episode of The Muppet Show, a million years ago, there was a Muppet version of each of the 7 deadly sins that showed up to do a pageant, and then, like, they get a call from somebody who wants to audition in to be the 8th deadly sin, and it's something like wearing silly pants at a funeral. If we're talking about music, we could go to, like, Panic at the Disco, where their first album had a bunch of songs that each, like, had to do with one of the 7 deadly sins. I mean, I could go on for days about all the different references in pop culture, and maybe I will in another video, but right now I want to talk about how this set of tropes is both naturally and artificially an influence on pretty much every piece of media that has characters in it today. So each of the 7 deadly sins, and the idea of the 7 deadly sins, regardless of whether you are religious or not, is so ingrained into the Western public consciousness that they've sort of become, like, character archetype tropes on their own, and people don't even know that they're, like, invoking or using these tropes half the time. So that's why there's, like, several instances where, for instance, not all 7 of the sins are used, but the ones that are used are very distinctly those sins. So, like, any band of any number of people in any piece of media can be pointed out to embody, like, one specific sin each, and I'm gonna prove it to you. I did not look any of these up that I'm gonna say just now. I made them all up off the top of my head and wrote them all down for the script. So know that this isn't like something that I've gotten from somebody else. This is just me proving this point. But in Sherlock Holmes, for instance, the titular character Sherlock Holmes is obviously Pride, because look at the amount of satisfaction he gets from explaining the most stupid, complicated bullshit to his simple-minded compatriot Watson, who could never have understood it by himself unless the far superior Holmes had shown it to him, despite the fact that Holmes tells Watson all the time that it's elementary reasoning and deduction and anyone should be able to do it. Of course they can't, because he's Sherlock Holmes. And then Watson is envy, exemplified by the fact that every story he writes is always about Holmes, with whom he holds this, like, long-standing grudge for being so much better than him. He wants the recognition that Holmes gets for all of his great detective-y work, and the only way he can do that is by getting it secondhand through him, so he's envious of it. And then Holmes's brother Minecraft? Wow. Holmes's brother Mycroft is Sloth. He's big and fat and does none of the work himself, despite easily being able to do it himself, because he's way smarter even than Sherlock, but he's just too lazy to do any of it. In The Hobbit, Gollum is lust because of insatiable desire for the ring to be returned to him. That was all he could possibly think about. Thorin is greed because he wants to get his huge hoard of gold back from the dragon Smaug, who is wrath, by the way, because of his having thrown the dwarves out of their own house and killed and eaten a bunch of them for funsies. And then Gandalf is pride because he's just the stuck-up know-it-all who keeps secrets from the other people just to make himself look cooler at the end of the day, because fuck him, why not? Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Sabrina is envy because she's always wishing that her life was more normal and that she could do the things that normal people do without magical shenanigans involved. And Salem is sloth, Salem the cat, because he generally just makes a nuisance of himself by complaining or asking that others do stuff for him. Harvey the boy crush is lust because he is the center of attention for literally every moment of sexual tension in that show. Hilda is pride, the super like flamboyant and like outgoing one with no regards for others so long as it'll benefit herself. And then Zelda is wrath because she's always like rebuffing Hilda and making these sort of veiled threats that if they don't do what she says then bad things might happen. Or in Legends of the Hidden Temple, the Nickelodeon like weekly game show. Even the characters in there are part of the 7 Deadly Sins. The Mayan guards were greed because they preferred to keep the treasure to themselves. The kids were lust because all they did that entire show was try to get their hands on that artifact that was at the end of the temple. And then Olmec was pride because he could tell everyone the answers to the questions that he's asking them so that they could get the thing more easily, but no, he'd prefer to keep the knowledge to himself because that makes him better than everyone else. Anything is this trope. This is an example of what I hated the most in any of the literature classes that I ever took, and that's forced analysis. The death of the author. The trope falls under the same category as the Christ figure trope, where literally every story has a character who could theoretically be likened to Jesus in the Jesus' story. It's a fault that so many literature teachers have just hammered into the heads of their students that everything a writer writes ever has a specific, deliberate, and important meaning. But the secret is that that's not true, even a little bit. What the writer intends for their story and how people interpret the story is always going to be vastly varied. It's a shame to assume that just because something is a way that it has like a deep meaning or has something ascribed to it such that it's a reflection of some deeper bullshit when it's not that. It does not automatically mean something if it's in the story. I mean, if a character wears a hat in a scene and it picks it and he says, you know, he picked up his blue hat and put it on his head, the literary analysts will go, oh, he's wearing a hat because he wants to cover something up and doesn't want to be seen about it because it's a reflection of him, you know, feeling guilty for the shit he did earlier in the story, and the way that he wears it has the metaphoric meaning of this, that, and the other, and the color of the hat reflects elements of his soul or some other bullshit like that. But the writer, on the other hand, may have thought that the character would probably wear a hat because he likes to wear hats, and blue is his favorite color. This video turned into a much more angry version of the video that I wanted it to turn out to be. And it turned out to be me just being angry about like pretentious literary analyst bullshit. So, my bad. This video, there will be a second video on this topic in the pipeline so that I can talk more about it, because while I was writing this script, I realized that I had way more to say than I could put into one video. And mostly it was because I got into the tangent of talking about the bullshit of the analysts and that kind of thing. So the next video dealing with the 7 Deadly Sins, we're gonna talk about how this like set of ideas had effects on how myth and literature grew instead of trying to ascribe it backwards onto stuff, we're gonna see how it actually influenced it going forward. So look forward to that one. I might be just as angry in that one. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed listening to me bitch about literary stuff. If you enjoyed this video, the like and subscribe buttons are down there waiting to give you big wet sloppy kisses. You can also follow my socials, that's the Facebook and Twitter that are in the description box. And you can throw some support my direction on Patreon if that's something that you'd like to do, to maybe see some more videos like this one. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.